This is our Cafe at Night activity. It is inspired by Vincent van Gogh's work of art. You should have watched the video. That was an art with Maddie and Dada, and it will review some of the things that Vincent van Gogh is known for. So today we are going to be doing our background. This is going to be at least a 2-week project. So today is only the first part. You'll have to check back next week to see what to do on week 2, possibly week 3. So the first thing we're going to do is get a piece of white paper. If you're going to be doing this with paint, watercolor, or however you want to do your background, make sure your paper is not too thin. It won't work if you're trying to use like copy paper. It's too thin. It'll wrinkle the page and it will fold over too easily. So regular construction paper, or if you have watercolor paper, that's even better. So we're going to start by getting a permanent marker. If you don't have a permanent marker, then you should just do it with pencil, because regular markers will bleed when you paint over them. If you're not going to paint, you're going to do coloring, then it really doesn't matter. So we're going to make some cobblestones. If you've watched the video, you'll see how there are cobblestones on each of we're just going to be making some letters. You can look like seagulls or upside down letter U's, and they're just going to kind of stagger so they're not one on top of the other. Don't have to be perfect. Most cobblestone roads are kind of uneven and bumpy, so don't get too crazy about making them all exactly the same. So we're going to fill up the page with your cobblestones. We're going to be borrowing another style that Vincent van Gogh did in another work of art, which was Starry Night, that I really love for our sky. Since we're going to be painting with watercolors, it's really hard to add white to the paper. So unless you want to paint around your stars, like the example of the Cafe at Night, we're going to do stars a little bit different for this project. Once you got all your cobblestones done, you're going to erase that middle line. If you're using permanent markers and you're going to paint, you don't want to see any lines. For the sky, like I said, we're going to be borrowing from Starry Night. And in Starry Night, he has these swirly lines that go around the stars. So we're going to use spirals. So up in the sky, you're going to add however many you think will look good in your picture. It doesn't have to be exactly like mine. When you make a spiral, if you start out with the letter E and then just continue to make circles around and around and around and around, that is basically how you do a spiral. So I'm just going to add spirals all throughout the sky, and this is going to be my night stars that are glowing outward. If you are close to the edge, you may have to just kind of imagine where the swirl lines and the spiral lines would continue to go from. It's easier in the middle, but sometimes I like to put some on the edges on the outside so that it doesn't look like all the stars stop immediately at the edges. Okay, getting pretty close to having enough. If you want a few more than I did, add some more. If you want some less, make your decisions. And up here you see where I just added a few lines right next to each other to make it look like there's spiral lines up in that corner. And then I did the same thing on some edges. So I just started with like a letter C and then a smaller C in there and a smaller one. And if you have room, make a little spiral on the inside. And that completes my drawing with the permanent marker. Once you're at this point, you're going to decide how you're going to add color to your paper. And my classroom, we're going to be using a product called Liquid Watercolor Paint. You can use it well with watercolor paint, or if you have that, if you have some other kind of paint, or just markers and colored pencils and crayons, and use that. We're trying to go for a light color that goes over the permanent markers. The reason why we use that permanent marker again is we don't want the black ink to smear into the watercolors. Be as messy or as rough as you want with these colors, because we're trying to make it look like what we saw in the Vincent van Gogh artwork. It's very active lines, making lots of movement in there. It's something we're also working on trying. So repetition creates movement. That's why we got all those cobblestones in there. We've got the spirals making the appearance of movement and active artwork. If you feel like there's too much of one color, you can grab a tissue or a rag and dab off some of the colors to make it a little bit rougher, a little bit more uneven. For the sky, I'm using a blue violet. I just happen to like those colors. You're using whatever you've got. If you want it to be a darker blue, navy blue, or light blue. We're trying to give the appearance of a night sky, so a darker blue or like this blue violet would be okay because it's a darker color. And I'm using some swirly lines, trying to get some more active lines in here. Just moving that paint around. I like to have some dark violet blue and some lighter areas. So kind of swirling that paint around. Okay, if the colors kind of blend together, those cobblestones can be different colors. They don't all have to be that yellow-orange that I used. If you mix that purple with that yellow-orange, it'll kind of turn brownish, and brown would be a perfectly acceptable color for cobblestones. Once again, if you feel like you've gotten too much paint on there, grab that rag or that tissue and just kind of blot things while it's still wet. And then kind of swirl the paint around a little bit with the tissue to give some more lines to movement. And that's where we're going to stop for today. Next week we're going to be using some construction paper and cutting out some buildings and adding a cafe and some tables. And we'll talk about balance and how to balance the artwork out so that there's something to look at on both sides. Have fun.